Okay, there we go. Werewolf had a bunch of things. We're going to go over them, but we're going to have a look because we have, in fact, a bunch of leaked stuff from the Werewolf 5th edition book. And as a result, we can take a look at what's changed. And while we're doing that, we're also going to go along with a basic primer of what the game is. And some of that you'll see in the preview. But I encourage you all to ask any questions that you might have. I have turned on... How do I turn on here? Yeah. So if you want... I think you can do an exclamation mark Q, and I think that's going to call up a question. Yes. So an exclamation mark Q will queue up a question, which I'll be able to throw up on screen if people are interested. But for now, let's have a look at the game as it stands, based on this preview that we've got. So this is the official preview that's available on Renegade's website. Renegade are the people who are developing this alongside Paradox, who are the publishers for the World of Darkness. Or they own the property anyway. I'm not sure if they're the publisher. But we'll be able to take a look at this and see what they have. So, like they've got some art, which I'm very pleased about. But this is going to help kind of give some context to what Werewolf is. We howl, and our howl echoes Gaia's lament. Our world, our mother, lies dying, and her murderers dance across what remains of her body, digging deeply of her wounds to forge the icons that signify to other hierophants the excess of their glee. We howl, our song stoking our fury. We howl, our packs taking the war form, biting, tearing, killing as Gaia bid us do, but her subjugators are myriad. Those who take from the world to foster their own greed, those who take from the world so they can accumulate more, the better to keep taking and taking in the nights to come until Gaia's bones have been picked clean. We howl, our dances around the fires stoking our fury. We howl in each other's presence to signal to our undiscovered kin and to call to others of our kind across tribe and moon sign. We must put aside our differences, turn the killing urge against those who paint the mark of the worm upon themselves, and not against each other. We howl our memories of our lost and our fallen and our spirit-sick betrayers, stoking our fury. We howl wondering, questioning, doubting if stoking our fury can revive our dying mother, or if our fury is but a paean to vengeance, an empty, anguished, monstrous roar at the end of the world. Do you howl with us? And against whom? Who stokes your fury? When will you rage? So, Werewolf, in and of itself, it's a game about an apocalypse. But there's a big change in 5th edition. In first through Revised and then in Werewolf 20th, the apocalypse was on its way. There were signs, there were prophecies, people knew that the prophecy was going to come true, the apocalypse was coming. And in 5th edition, that's changed. In 5th edition, it might be coming, but it may have already happened. And the point is now for werewolves who live in secret in the modern world, in today's world, whether they can claw their way back from the apocalypse. Requiem Lost asks, will this still be the 5... Oh, I gotta put that image behind here. Hold on. Let's just get that down there. Will this still be the 5-point attributability spread, or have they changed up the character sheet to a different system? So it in fact is still the 5-point sheet. We don't have an official character sheet yet, but we did get some indication of what it might look like. Let me get a hold of that for you so that you'll be able to see it. It's the one thing. I was like, I've got everything prepared, and then I did not prepare this because I am a fool. So let me just save this image and save this one, and I will show it to you right now. They showed one during a video. That's very true. So this is the character sheet that they released in a video. So as you can see, I mean, like, this is a screen grab of a video, so it's not very high resolution. We don't even know if this is the final sheet as it looks, but it is very much a attributes, skills, 5-dot system. But it takes a lot from what we've seen from the new World of Darkness, later on rebranded the Chronicles of Darkness. Health and willpower are now no longer just set. They depend on the attributes that you have. Health is probably it's a mixture of stamina and I think a static value, so it's stamina plus 4, I think it is. Willpower will be a combination of composure and resolve, if that fits along well with if it fits in with what we've seen in Vampire 5th. And the skills are here and they're all available. So yes, you'll notice first of all some differences between previous versions of Werewolf. Appearance is no longer an attribute. Now that's been put in with composure. Perception is no longer an attribute. That has been replaced by resolve. And the way that it works now is the first is the force attribute, the second is the finesse attribute, and the third is the stamina attribute. I forget exactly what it's supposed to be called. But in social situations, charisma is your force of social ability, manipulation is your ability to finesse in social situations, and composure is ability to resist social. To be able to maintain your social presence, even in the face of adversity. Mental, it's the same thing. Intelligence being the force of your mental ability. Wit's your ability to finesse your way around it, and resolve, your ability to stick to your guns. So, and if they do what they did in V5, appearance will be a merit, which I honestly think is a great idea. I've always been a fan of appearance being something that you can opt into, but that it's not something that you have to necessarily spend dots on. Depending on who your storyteller is, appearance is very often a dump stat because there's just no reason to put anything in it because it never comes up. And then sometimes you'll have a storyteller who just puts way too much stock into it. Especially, unfortunately, if that storyteller wants excuses to act inappropriately. So I'm kind of glad that we're not there. I don't know if resolve is necessarily perception, but it might be. The thing is, perception as a stat is one I've spoken about this on Clinic Hours before. Perception is a stat that I'm not a huge fan of. I find it rough just because it's so important for a lot of stories, and so people tend to jack a lot of dots into it. But we'll have to see. Because I know also that there may be changes. They haven't necessarily said specifically that. So wit's awareness is passive, resolve awareness is for active searching, I think is the key. I believe Avatar of Cain is correct. Appearances normally it's just annoying. So if we also go down into skills, we can see you've got kind of the standard ones that you've seen before, although here they are in a slightly different order. I don't believe that the skills are demarcated by physical, social, and mental, and they're also not demarcated by, or rather they seem to be demarcated that way, left, center, and right. Like left seems to be all physical stuff, middle seems to be all social stuff, and right seems to be all mental stuff. But I don't think that you have to pick 1395 like in the 20th anniversary edition stuff. So that's the situation. Alertness is not necessarily a thing. Awareness is here, and awareness, I believe, will take the place of alertness. No more regular seeing versus supernatural seeing. Another interesting thing that we see based on this, werewolves have a very... so in previous editions, werewolves, part of the Guru Nation, so werewolves across the world, are loosely affiliated. They're not necessarily, they don't have open governments or anything like that, but they have a rank system where you could challenge to go up in rank, and then your rank would also depend on how you interacted with other werewolves. And rank was based on renown. Renown is still here, so we still see that you are tracking your glory, your honor, and your wisdom, but rank is not present on the sheet, which is interesting to me. Oh, is the chat not showing up here? Chat should be here. Where are you, chat? Oh, it's hidden. Ha! Come back up, chat. You can play. There we go. Tech is just being rude today. So for renown, act in accordance with the way that the guru believe you should act in terms of glory, honor, and wisdom, and you can go up. But these, based on what we know, will actually have more of a interaction with how you interact with spirits in the game. Werewolf is very much a game that is animistic to a certain degree, that spirits are a big part of the world, and this is based on how the spirits view you, and that will tie into how you activate your gifts, which is how werewolves use, it's essentially their powers, their magic, their disciplines, their arts are gifts, which you can see down here. There's a place for that, and there's a 5-dot section here for rage, which we'll get into. We do know more about rage, and that's in the preview. So that's what the sheet looks like at the moment. But there is something that is very much an important thing to note. So for people who are newer to Werewolf, it's a game, according to this, in which it's about tearing apart your enemies and living with repercussions, but it's also a game about the differences between people and the mutual sacrifices made to affect or endure global consequences. It's a game about environmentalism, but it's also a game about spirituality. It's about providing a different perspective or set of truths. It's about a world crumbling, but people doing something about it. However, the most important thing on this page is right here at the bottom right. If you're familiar with previous editions of Werewolf, let us be up front and state that this 5th edition is a reimagining, not a continuation. You can even call it a reboot if you prefer. The truths and lore of previous editions aren't necessarily true in this edition. Take this book and the world it proposes at face value. This is kind of huge. This is a big deal because it used to be back in the day that whenever a new book was released, it would build upon what the previous edition had already set. It would sometimes make big changes in what was called the meta, the meta plot of the game itself. And here, they're starting it over. And they're doing that for a bunch of different reasons. There were elements of the old game which are kind of distasteful at this point in time. Specifically, the old game had certain themes which would be less applicable or less palatable in today's society. And I'm not saying that they are, that it's like the old game was deliberately attempting to be racist or sexist or discriminatory, and more just that some of these themes are no longer stuff that people want to explore in today's world. And some of these themes also were misguided or based on appropriation, which we are trying to steer clear from. The biggest example that I can name right now from an overall perspective is that in Werewolf the Apocalypse before, breeding was considered something that was an important part. By breeding, I mean who your parents were and whether or not you are derived from good stock. One of the merits that you could take, well, backgrounds actually is what they were called, was pure breed, which showed just like how well you could trace back your ancestry. And some werewolves couldn't have it and some werewolves could. And the game wasn't making a statement that says that pure breed was absolutely something better for you to have, but it did imply that it gave you benefits and advantages, and they wanted to take that out, so they did. Guru also had rules about who they were and weren't allowed to love. It was forbidden for a Guru to mate with Guru because the offspring of two werewolves would create something that was inevitably considered unclean and had disabilities. And they didn't feel very good about saying that, like, you were going to control who you can and can't love. And we're also not going to say that based on who you love, your children may be cursed or unclean. So they got rid of that. So, and yes, the term, which I will say, the term Métis is a reference to very real people, especially considering that I'm in Canada. And the fact that they were then using that word as a pejorative, it was time to change it. So they did. This is going to annoy a lot of people who are fans of Old Werewolf. Luckily, to them, I say those books are still out there. You can still play the game. You can still get the PDFs. They are available. They're online. Go to DriveThruRPG and you can find them. And you can still play the game with your friends, and that will be fine. But I'm very glad that Werewolf is kind of taking a step up and taking it out into the real, not into the real world, but taking it out into an updated world and updating it for today's players. So the way I understood it is that it referred to the daughter of Zeus, not the people. There's a lot of different explanations for it, especially because the term can sometimes be used as a pejorative here in Canada. It's a very real people, but it was also at some point used as an insult. Look, I'm not here to get into that specific debate because I know that I don't have all of the answers to that. I just know that whether or not it was intended, and I don't believe that there was a huge intent to besmirch an entire people, considering that the original Werewolf was written by Europeans who may not have been as aware of what was going on in North America. Yeah, as Flower of August said, which I think is honestly the correct way of looking at it, most of 90s World of Darkness writing is just, this name sounds cool, let's use it without looking into the cultural background of it. Which, yep, that's absolutely right. It is an unfortunate reality. It's kind of too bad, but it is what it is. So the fact that they're taking that out, great. Overall, the fact that they are reimagining the game, I think, is the correct move. There's a lot here that's still familiar and a lot that people will still remember if they were fans of Werewolf from long ago, such as me. But there's absolutely stuff that they've decided to take out or things that they've decided to modify. And again, no one is telling or forcing you to play in a certain way. If you want to put things back the way that they were in your own games, that's fine. If you want to reorganize Werewolf 5th Edition and take elements from some of it and then change elements in others to fit your game, also fine. All of this is completely acceptable. There is no problem there. Requiem Lost asks, not too familiar with the setting, so please excuse the ignorance. That's totally fine. That's what we're here for. But will this still be linked to the greater World of Darkness, or has it basically split from that world? So the 5th edition books, so right now we have Vampire 5th edition and we have Hunter 5th edition, and all of them are basically saying, yes, they're in the same world. Yes, you have certain compatibilities between them, but they're not required, and we're also not going to a whole lot of effort to balance between the two of them. They're making some attempts to balance them, but the games are, and they are ostensibly in the same universe, but the games don't rely on you being able to build from all of them. Vampires don't have to be an antagonist in your game. Vampires don't have to be a part of any werewolf chronicle that you're running, same in reverse, but you can. So yes, they are part of the same universe. They are all part of the World of Darkness. But crossplay has always been a little bit iffy. I don't imagine that that's going to stop with this. So it was Justin Akili who was the biggest pusher of keeping things separate, especially in a Hunter 5th. Yes, that's true. And Chandra, once again, with the correct statement here, it's the same as older World of Darkness game lines. Yes, but no, but kinda. And yeah, that's basically exactly it. Flower of August also points out, when you play vampires, their truths are real. When you play werewolf, you use theirs. That's my approach to the kitchen sink that became World of Darkness, became after a while. That's what you kind of have to do. And I'm going to recommend that if you are running cross-campaign games, be sure to make sure that your players are aware of what truths are real and what are not. I know that there's often like this temptation to say, well, you know, I don't want my players to know, so I'm going to I'm not going to tell them explicitly what it's going to be, and their characters will have to find out what the truths are going along. And yeah, that can be really interesting, but unfortunately, that ignores the fact that a lot of time you're not going to roleplay everything in terms of the knowledge that a character gains. So people will still think about the book and think like, oh, but that's what it says in the book that I'm more familiar with. Just be very cautious about this. It is really not fun if you have been acting in a way because you assume that you know what's going on, and then you find out that it doesn't work the way that you thought it did because the storyteller is referencing different material. So, the truths of Werewolf the Apocalypse. So let's see if anything has changed from Werewolf 20th, or revised, or 2nd edition, or whatever you played, to today. Werewolves have the ability to take numerous forms on a spectrum from lupine to hominid. It's absolutely still the case. Werewolves belong to multiple worlds, spirit and flesh, wolf and human, but are wholly accepted by none. Also true. If you are a werewolf, you were born either as a human or a wolf, but you can't really fit into that society seamlessly any longer. It's just impossible for you to fully live as one or the other. Werewolves are feared and mistrusted by each of the worlds to which they partially belong. Yeah, I'd say so. Werewolves are creatures of rage, forever at risk of losing control of themselves. Yes, so werewolves in this game are not, when the full moon is out, I lose control of myself and I wake up the next morning and I don't know what I did. Werewolves are conscious of what they're doing and they move through the world, having their abilities and powers in an attempt to fight for Gaia, the spirit of the earth. However, there is elements of rage in them, and that rage can get out of control, but it's not specifically tied to the full moon, although the moon does play an aspect to it. Crosshair says, had a bit of stuff, but the biggest thing from listening is this for me. This is a reboot in essence, which means that it's great for new players to hop in as they're in the same pool, as it were. Yes, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to wait until this game came out before suggesting to my players that we play this game. And so far, I've been very pleased with what I've seen. Werewolves are charged with an unreliable greater purpose by Gaia, a spiritual entity who is herself inherently unknowable. Yep, that's basically the same. And werewolves consider the worm, a primal force of entropy and decay, to be the chief threat to Gaia, and much of Guru existence is spent confronting its agents, real or imagined. So in terms of the cosmology of werewolf, they believe that there is a triad of forces, the wild, which is the stuff of primordial beginning, weaver, which takes that stuff and makes it into a solid thing to give it rules, and then the worm, which breaks down what exists so that it can be put back into the wild and therefore come back again. So it's like a circle of life type of thing. But werewolves believe that the worm has grown too powerful, that the weaver went insane, and that the started trying to calcify everything, and the worm, in an attempt to make sure that things didn't just stay static forever, grew too strong. And so they are threatening the overall balance of Gaia. That's at least what it was. I'm not sure if it's going to be the same because we don't have the whole book, but there it is. Yeah, so lupine is a term that references wolves. All right. So you have a few changes here based on how you start. So you knew something was wrong even before your first change. You could taste the poison in the air and the chemicals on the streets and sidewalks. It was an alienating experience. None of your friends cared quite so much. It just didn't bother them the same. Then came the first change in your horror at the realization of what you were, a werewolf, a guru. After your first change, you put the pieces together. Gaia, spirits, the world that you inherited imposed upon you a duty to protect it and to destroy the enemies responsible for despoiling her. Your view of the world expanded, grew more nuanced, more certain as things fell into place one by one. You could turn on the news, and although they didn't speak there about it in Guru terms, the meaning was the same. Endless stories of new ravages, perpetrated by monsters in human form, wearing expensive suits, ready with excuses and explanations. But this time you could not be fooled. You smelled the greed surging inside them. You had their scent. So werewolves make a journey in which they understand the world. Some of this is related to the sort of tribes that each player is going to have to pick. And one thing is that they are part human, part wolf, not wholly either, and they're at once feared and even reviled by both wolves and humans. They're also part spirit and part flesh, and they often find themselves at odds with creatures of one or the other realm because spirits remember ancient pacts that bind them into service to the Guru, which sometimes they resent, and physical creatures experience delirious memories of the terrors wrought upon their kind by werewolves in times long past. So if you're familiar with things like the mists for Changeling, what werewolves have, there's an effect called the delirium, and the delirium takes place if you assume your war form. Humans freak out and then they rationalize what happened. They come up with reasons for what happened, and it's because of deep, deep, deep memories buried in humanity of how werewolves back in the day used to really mess them up. So werewolves call this the veil, much as the vampires call it the masquerade, although theirs is entirely their doing. It's not supernatural. And changelings would refer to that as the mists, or the rite of ignorance. So that still exists here in Werewolf 5th. What do werewolves do? They fight to take back what has been lost. The apocalypse has happened or is happening, depending on who you talk to, and now it's up to each pack of Gru to strike back in a way that its members find meaningful. This sort of conflict is often the crux of a story or chronicle, and this often, but not always, involves confronting the influence of the worm or stopping rampaging avarice from feeding it further. The pack may need to reclaim a site of spiritual importance that's been overrun by corrupt werewolves, kill their way through an occupying enemy force, or retake a Guru-claimed territory that a multinational wants to strip mine or deforest. It's also the part of their lives that has the most immediate fallout, with normal people who are likely to see the Guru as dangerous radicals or worse, rampaging, blood-spattered monsters ready to tear humanity asunder. But over the course of the story, werewolves are building their own legend. Renown is especially important to the Guru. It represents the deeds they've accomplished that have value in werewolf society, and it represents spirits' esteem for them and willingness to help them perform special gifts and rites. It's said that the greatest Guru don't die, but in fact live on as spirits themselves and practically become the legends they have made for themselves. The spirit world plays no small part in a werewolf's life, and packs almost invariably find themselves exploring the mysteries of the Umbra. So if changelings have the dreaming, werewolves have the Umbra, which is the spirit world that's laid over alongside or on top of this one. Gru have any number of reasons to venture into the increasingly scarred and alien spirit wilds, whether on brief jaunts to engage capricious spirits, on treks through the spiritscape to ambush unwary enemies in the physical world, or on epic undertakings whereby they fight spiritual malignancy at its root, eliminating hostile spirits that nourish themselves off corruption's sway in the physical world. So, Flower of August, I hope they retcon away the we killed more or less all the humans because reasons thing. Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. I mean, we also don't know if the War of Rage is going to be a part of things. So there's many different kinds of shapeshifters. Werewolves are kind of the primary one. They're the ones that are designed for players, but back in the day, in previous editions of Werewolf, you had were-ravens, were-rats, were-cats, were-foxes, were-bears, were-coyotes. So the problem is that back in the day, there was a war of rage in which all the shapeshifters kind of had to deal with going up against each other, and werewolves were kind of responsible for messing a lot of them up. So we'll see if that still plays a part in this, but we're not sure. So, the Crosshair asks, what is the apocalypse in a nutshell mentioned so often in core part after all? So the answer is we don't know. In 5th edition, that isn't clear. In previous editions, the apocalypse was at its core, the theory that the worm would win, that the worm, this force, one of the three great forces, the worm would essentially either destroy the world or take it over to the point where it would be impossible to fight back. This game assumes that the apocalypse has already happened, so it's assumed that werewolves have lost the war against the worm, and now they're attempting to claw their way back in. Requiem asks, are werewolves meant to be heroes, villains, anti-heroes? I've always been confused by that when I learn about these games. I know it depends on the group, but just from the lore, it is not very clear to me. So the key in this game is that the player characters are meant to be heroes, but heroes of their own design, so what they believe is correct. The real answer is that much in the same way as in Mage or Changeling, being a werewolf does not inherently make you good. However, werewolves are trying to fight for the planet, so in that way they are heroes. But they often fall prey to infighting, to their own rage, to their own capricious nature. So they are not always heroes. Sometimes your biggest antagonist will be another werewolf or another group of werewolves. Sometimes you will manage to accomplish fantastic things for your community, and sometimes you will be able to defeat your enemy, but at huge cost to the community that you've been trying to protect. So it's a very nuanced answer, but the real reason is, the real answer, I suppose, is you're what you want to be as a player. In general, that means that you are going to be a hero, but what that means is up to you. It's more of a Ragnarok apocalypse, not a Hellfire Rains from the Sky apocalypse. Now, there was a book called Apocalypse that was released when the World of Darkness was winding down. And they gave examples of what the apocalypse could look like. But you got to choose which one you thought would be the most appropriate. And one of them was just like, yeah, the world's just like exploding. So, you know, but that doesn't really tend to make for fantastic stories if just the world ends. So, speaking of mysteries, werewolves must be forever vigilant. For others of their kind who don't yet know what they are, Kinseeking Guru are always looking out for others of their kind, whether to mentor them in the ways of their pack or patron spirit, or to keep them out of the clutches of the so-called fallen tribes. Werewolves are few and far between, and there's nothing so ruinous as the loss of kinwolves to the extreme ideologies of werewolf tribes, or to the realities of being a werewolf with no knowledge of how to handle it. All of these exploits and more belong to your troop, and as you gather to tell stories around the table virtually, in live action format, or in any number of other ways. Everyone's favorite books, the End of the World's books. Yeah, no, Avatar of Cain, though, yeah, those books were not well received. Gehenna, Apocalypse, Time of Judgment, just not great. So it's sort of a save the world the best way we know how. It may not always be right or gel with other groups, but it's what you believe is best. Yep. It's a very good way of putting it. Solid way of putting it. So, storytelling, games, and role-playing. So it begins with humanity. So this is basically just talking about what a role-playing game is. Mentions that a storyteller exists. As a Werewolf the Apocalypse player, you take on a persona and role of the character that you create. One of the participants creates and guides the story. They build the setting and populace. So this is just your standard, like, what is a role-playing game? So we know this going on. This game seems to still have put a considerable amount of power in the storyteller's hands. While all of these games will say that players are the ones that drive the story, that while the storyteller creates the story, the players are the ones who end up living it and twisting it and shaping it. A lot of games these days have been giving players a lot more agency to decide what happens in any individual scene. Storyteller games, the storyteller tends to be the arbiter of what occurs. So instead of players being able to roll dice and then say, okay, well, I got this, so the old man is going to accept my excuse and let me stay the night without spending any money. Whereas in this game, the storyteller would say, you got a certain number of successes and I will interpret what that means. So it does put more of an onus on the storyteller, less on the players, but also it can create a more unified vision of what the game is supposed to be like. Both kinds of games have their advantages, and I suggest that you play the kind of game that you want to play. I personally prefer games where the storyteller has a bit more agency in it because I find that it creates a more cohesive narrative, but your mileage may vary. The other thing is that games where the players can also have agency tend to be games that work well with troops that don't have storytelling experience. And that's not to say that if you don't have storytelling experience, you can't play these other kinds of games, but they're very much geared towards making it easy to determine what happens next. But easy isn't always necessarily better. So, at any rate, just make sure that I've got this open here. Okay, it looks like things are still okay. Great. All right, fantastic. So let's see if there's anything else here. Play aids. So it's designed to be played at a table on a virtual tabletop or online chat servers. I like how it says some emergent format, as if Werewolf hasn't been played online for over 20 years, which it has been. And I know because I did. And I used to run a Werewolf game, quite a large Werewolf game for quite some time. The game has no board, but dice, pencil, paper. So this is what you need to know. You need dice. The dice required are 10-sided, available in any game store. You need 2 colors of 10-sided dice, 1 color for regular dice, the other color for rage dice. So one thing that I will point out about these games is that they are not like Fantasy Flight games, which have very specific dice with very specific symbols. And those, if you're not using their dice, there are conversion tables, but they are very messy. Not in this case. In this case, it's pretty easy to deal with by using normal D10s, which means we'll be able to use NFL's D10s again. Yay! So its successes are roll a 6 and up, failure 5 and down, and then if you roll a 10, that matters. And if you are rolling rage dice, then your 1s and 2s matter. But that's all you need to know. So it's not nearly as complicated as other things, so don't feel the need to run out and buy specialty dice. They do exist. We didn't choose to order them when we ordered the book. We could have, but we didn't, partially because the dice were quite expensive, and also importing things from the United States is already pretty expensive, but they're not really needed. It can be faster if you like being able to look down and just saying, oh, and that's the answer, but otherwise you can just count up your dice. They don't say how many dice. 0 to 10 won't read again. The recommendation is typically to have 10d10 per player. You can get away with fewer dice. The minimum I would recommend is to have 10 dice for the table, but players often like to have their own dice that they will roll, and usually 10 dice is going to be the maximum that you'll ever need to roll. So 10 is a pretty safe number to say. I know that I'm saying this to Flower of August. Who knows this? But just in case you were wondering, you generally want to have 10 dice per player. Storyteller counts as a player in this case and should have their own dice. 10 dice, 5 of a different color is also the right way to put it, because rage dice, of which you can have from 1 to 5 or 0 to 5 actually, you will need them of a different color. There is also one other thing. Rage checks can be rolled at the same time as other rolls, and a rage check involves 1 die, which doesn't count for your successes or failures. So it might be worth it to have 1 die off to the side that's a 3rd color from all of the rest of them, but that's not necessary. It's not required, because you don't have to roll that at the same time. You can roll your dice and then pick up 1 die and roll it for the rage check. But if you want to do it all at once, you can do it that way. So, mature content warning. I'm really kind of curious to see what they're going to say here. For the past few decades, World of Darkness games have addressed the darkness in the real world through horror stories. These games have addressed AIDS, capitalist exploitation, sexual predation, the resurgence of far-right political extremism, religious fanaticism, state and private surveillance, and many other issues. This Entry in the World of Darkness series doesn't shy from any of these themes, and we believe exploration of such subjects is as valid in role-playing games as it is in other media. Inclusion of a problematic subject in a storyteller game is not the same as glorifying it, and if you take the chance to explore it critically, the result can be the exact opposite. If we understand the problems facing us, we are better armed to fight them. So it may include in-world references and expressions of a lot of things. However, important to mention here, I like how at the end it says, and spiders, to name a few. It's a game about monsters and the cruel things those monsters do to people. It's also a game about people who may have to endure circumstances caused by others' actions and who do so without complete knowledge. For example, an individual might become so desperate that they invite spiritual possession, but that doesn't mean they deserve being turned into a monster. Why are you telling me this, you might be thinking? Someone at your table is not familiar with this game. Someone at your table has dealt with some of these issues in real life. Someone at your table wants to know that you read this warning and that you'll be considerate to them as players, even as you put their character through the ringer. In the third appendix, you can find specific techniques on how to handle difficult subjects in your game in a fashion that's respectful to your players and their experiences. Determine beforehand which techniques your group wants to use. People have different needs, and not every method works for every person. This is a game about monsters, but it is only a game. Don't use it as an excuse to be a monster yourself. So, this is kind of a key, and the reason why it's important to mention it like here is, as much as it says all these things, I have zero doubt that in the appendix they are going to mention things like lines and veils so that you can just take certain elements out of the game itself. For instance, for me, sexual violence, it isn't in games that I run. I just, no. I will find ways around it. I will ignore it. It will not happen. And that's just a choice that I've made alongside my players. And if my players really wish that they were playing in a game where there was sexual violence, then they can find a different game. Or they can try to convince me before the game starts that I should allow different subjects in here. But I kind of doubt that that one's going to be put in the mix. So it's important for us to note here that the game is already trying to warn you that this isn't something that you have to worry about. I kind of wish that they didn't put it in an appendix. It's a little bit of an implication that it's not as important if you throw it into an appendix, but I'm going to be fair. I'm going to say I'm glad that they're doing it. And honestly, it's good that they're addressing it right off the bat. So Chandra, making sure that you have at least 30 D10s. Yep, that makes sense. But 30 D10s is a lot for games like this. Of course, that's not to say that I don't have way more than that. I have a lot of D10s. So, Flower of August, this may be a bit of covering their bases too if you want to be cynical, because we know people are going to hand it poorly anyway. Some people, that is, yeah, of course. Which is really true, and it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And I just choose to not play with people who are going to be a jerk about safety at a game. So we have a lexicon. Lexicon's a good way to see if there's any differences. So let's have a look. Apocalypse, for the crosshair, you were asking before, the physical and spiritual end of the world, brought about by relentless human greed and consumption. So one thing that is important to mention is that a physical and spiritual end of the world doesn't necessarily mean that the world no longer exists, and it doesn't mean that all life is gone. Auspice, the moon sign under which one experiences one's first change into a werewolf, an indicator of one's role in werewolf society. So the role in werewolf society, still from the old books, but the old books, it was when you were born, not when you experienced your first change. So that is a difference. I don't think that's a huge problem. A bane is a foul spirit in service to the destructive cosmological force known as the worm, which I think is probably in here. Yeah, it's down there. Cairn, a place where the spirit world and the physical world are in close accord or proximity. To many werewolves, a holy place. Yeah. Krynos or Krinos, depending on who you talk to, the war form of the guru. So one thing that we know that is different is that Krinos is not a form that you can maintain for very long. In old games, you could swap to Krinos and you can just be in Krinos forever. Now you can't. If you are in Krinos and you haven't killed something in the previous turn, you have to spend willpower. If you don't, you frenzy. This is a big change, and I think that some people are going to be disappointed because they like being able to stand up and walk around as like gigantic wolf creatures, but I think I'm in favor of this. It gives more of an incentive to use the other forms. First change. The initial, because I'm going to skip over, delirium is as I described, it's the fugue state that afflicts humans who see werewolves for what they are. First change, the initial time that an individual transforms into a werewolf and thereby realizes what they truly are. The first change can happen almost any time after the age of maturity. So that's, I mean, as Flower of August has mentioned here, that is an interesting thing. I've lost, featured chat is gone rogue, which is annoying, but that's at least not my fault. Because it's that is outside my control. So yeah, I like it. It used to be that you would go through your first change kind of like when you hit puberty or shortly afterwards, and it could be later. This sort of gives the player the option of being able to choose when they hit their first change, which I think is important, because the other thing that I'll point out is a lot of people who play role-playing games back in the 90s, they were like all, you know, between 15 and 30 years old, and now it's a hobby that's grown up with them, and people are playing at all ages, and some people aren't necessarily interested in playing younger people. So I like this change. Let's see if there's anything else, because I don't kind of just want to read through the entire lexicon here. So Guru Nation, this one's important. A loose coalition of Guru tribes, ostensibly with common goals and service to Gaia. The Guru Nation has sundered in the Age of Apocalypse, and invoking it now can come across as idealistic or backward-looking. So back in the day, in other games, the Guru Nation was a thing, and people absolutely were part of the Guru Nation, and now it seems like it's something that whose time has passed, and some people might be clinging to vestiges of it, but it just no longer exists. So I'm kind of curious about that. I am down for that change. Gaia's Howl is kind of new, but it was explained in different ways in different books. An audible indicator capable of sometimes affecting other senses of the Age of Apocalypse, perceptible only by Guru and perhaps some spirits. So it's not quite. I think it's new in that it's codified in here in the lexicon, but it's not a new concept. So Harno, a state of werewolf misery or despair in which they believe that nothing matters, so why try? That was in the old ones, but this one is new. Hauglosk, a state of werewolf fervor or fanaticism in which they believe that they must take urgent action immediately. I really like the concept of Hauglosk. I am sympathetic to people who are fans of the Get of Fenris tribe from previous editions, because the Get have fallen to Hauglosk. But I really like the idea that it's not that they're evil, a werewolf who's fallen to Hauglosk, it's that they feel such pressure to do something that they are no longer rational in what they do, which does make sense. So I am happy that they have this, because I believe that the concept of Harno was a really interesting one because it's also an interesting role-playing encounter for people. But I thought it was interesting that now we have something that is the concept of giving up, and then the exact opposite. So I really think that's cool. So it looks like unfortunately this is, well, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on who you are, this is still here. The Impergium, in times of legend, a vicious culling by which werewolves slaughtered humans, seemingly resulting in the generational terror that now provokes the delirium. It's fine that this is still in the game. It doesn't really come up all that often, so I'm fine with it. Kin is a werewolf who has not yet been accepted as Guru, a werewolf who doesn't yet know that they're a werewolf. This is different, because it used to be that you would have kinfolk, and we don't have that anymore. Kinfolk used to exist because if you were born to a werewolf parent, you would not necessarily turn out to be Guru. You would sometimes just end up being a human who was affected less by delirium and could live alongside werewolves. And they've taken that out. I think this is a good thing, because it always sort of smacked a little bit of like, yep, your breeding is still important, and we don't want that. No, don't want it. Kinseeker or kinseeking is new, a werewolf who looks for nascent unknowing werewolves. The act of looking for kin makes sense. Yeah, werewolf, the breeding is gone, which is like so much better for me. Oh, it's back. I didn't like it back then. I just never put it into words, and now I have the words for it, and I don't like it. So I'm glad they got rid of it. The Crosshair is saying, I quite like the setting here. It's less a secret werewolf society that kills things in the name of the big guy, and more of a we were wolves, now we survive, live, and do what we can. Yeah, it is a bit more grounded. And I think that that's what they were going for in this game. Werewolf the Apocalypse was very much about like the Guru coming together as a whole, but a lot of infighting between them and between tribes, between auspices, between ranks, between nations. That can still sort of happen here, but now it's kind of taken a mixture of old Werewolf the Apocalypse, and what you saw in Werewolf the Forsaken, which was the New World of Darkness version, which was very much about you and your pack, and that was it. And you were defending your territory, and that's all. So it's kind of striking the midpoint between those, and I'm here for it. Claves are the same. The Litany. So this is the thing that I really want to see. A set of maxims and mores by which werewolf society conducted itself in the past, but viewed askance in a modern context as insufficient to help the Guru prevent the apocalypse. I think the Litany is one of the cool things about Werewolf, and the fact that now it's like it still exists and yet people are recognizing that it's not necessarily what it should be means we get to play with a society where some werewolves are going to give a shit about the Litany, some will directly oppose it, and some might find things to like about it and not. It's kind of like the Eshiat, if you're familiar with Changeling, or the rules that the Camarilla impose upon him. The concept of the Litany, though, is cool. However, if I remember correctly, there are going to be some elements of the old Litany that just won't exist anymore. I don't think that they're even going to mention things like Guru shall not mate with Guru. I think that's just gone, which used to be a part of the Litany, and now it won't be there. So I am happy about that. Yeah, the traditions. Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize I had to use the actual name. So Lupus, the wolf form of the werewolf, yep, no problem. Moots, so a cultural, political, or practical meeting of werewolves, often at a cairn and hosted by a sept. Glad that this is still here. I think moots are neat. Pack, the basic social unit of werewolves. Packs may form from a sense of duty or be mandated by Elder Guru, or they may emerge out of dependency. So there's a bunch of different ways that a pack can sort out. I think this is going to be great for a session 0 for players to figure out. Why did their pack form? Rage, so the werewolf's fury made manifest, the raw destructive force of being Guru, at once a blessing and a curse. Yeah, it's pretty much the same. Septs, a number of packs sworn to the protection of a cairn. A sept can consist of a lone pack or many. Yep. Still pretty much the same. Spirits are fine. Talisman, an object of spiritual power, spiritual significance, or other wonder held in high esteem by Guru, which means we're not calling them fetishes anymore. Or talons. I'm okay with this. Fetishes, it's a loaded term. Talisman does the job. It's just fine. The triad, the 3 cosmological forces, the Wild Weaver and Worm, that form a sort of cosmological cycle or state of reality. Yep, that's still there. I think that's great. Tribe, a faction of werewolves pledged in service to a particular patron spirit. I like how they're going with patron spirit instead of totem. A tribe's outlook represents a way of facing the apocalypse. Great. Makes sense. Umbra, also spirit wilds, the spirit world, the shadow or reflection of the physical world, seemingly caused by emotional resonance. Fantastic. I'm really looking forward to what they're doing with the Umbra. The veil is the euphemism for the human world's ignorance of the supernatural, especially werewolves. Sure, that's the same. So the Weaver being the cosmological forcer of order, structure, and stasis. That must be a typo in there. Wild being the cosmological force of creation, change, and chaos. And Worm being the cosmological force of destruction, decay, and entropy, ascendant in the Age of Apocalypse. So all of that is good. Yeah, Avatar of Cain, it was a word that was largely misused. So the lexicon doesn't throw any huge things out there. So then they go into the tribes. The various they go into, I think, 3 of the tribes that they have here in the previews here. Glasswalkers being the tribe that is about the ones who are most proficient with like science, technology, the ones who are most likely to use gadgets. engineers, technicians, and inventors, as you can see here, whose skill at making machines work usually takes the form of coaxing the spirits inhabiting them into performing exceptionally. So each of the tribes have verbs, which is one of the things that they've kind of put in there, and we can actually have a look at those because I have them here. So you'll notice here under Glasswalkers, they say research, build, hack, and repurpose. And then in the book, you see research, build, hack, repurpose. So they're really kind of keeping that in there. If we look at these, some of these are tribes that are returning. Some of them are tribes that are returning that are much that are changed from what they were before, and some of them are renamed and repurposed entirely. So the Black Furies used to be a tribe where that was composed entirely of women, of female werewolves. Now that's no longer the case, but they still have the same kind of core of now fighting for the oppressed and those who are subject to injustice. So their verbs being avenge, overcome, dismantle, and demolish makes a lot of sense. Bone Gnars, they're the one of the two urban werewolf tribes. They are much more kind of about living on the street, of living in kind of like direct contact with the underworld or the poorest parts of society, as opposed to the Glasswalkers, who tend to be more associated with either riches or technology. Children of Gaia, pretty much the same. Heart Wardens replaced the Fianna. This was actually a thing. They were originally called Fianna in 5th. But when people pointed out that they were trying to remove real-world terms out of the tribes, because other names for tribes were based on other real-world people, then people complained about that. And initially there was resistance to it, and then they saw the light. So, yep, Heart Wardens gone. Happy about that. Justin was seriously adamant on keeping Fianna, and he at one point said it's just a word, which I think that was what did him in. I don't know either, Kung Fu Fenris. I sort of feel like if you're going to apply something to something, then you should apply it across the board. Gale Stalkers, again, one of those that is very much specifically a replacement. So is Ghost Council, of tribes that were kind of named after real world things. So Ghost Council are about secrets. Gale Stalkers track, ambush, pursue, and harry. People will be happy to see, potentially, or unhappy to see, that the Red Talons exist, but the Red Talons, I believe, are no longer specifically tied to kill all the humans. I think that they are still very much about kill, just destroy things that don't work, but Red Talons used to be a tribe exclusively made of Wolfborn, and I don't think that's the case any longer. Shadow Lords. There are a number of people who are really in love with the Shadow Lords from back in the day. Envision, plan, scheme, intimidate. They are the political tribe, like the movers and shakers. The ones who want to rule, and if they can't rule, then they will rule as puppet masters instead. People love the Shadow Lords. I've never really played one, so there you go. The Silent Striders, Journey, Scout, Deliver, and Sabotage. The PC that I played the most of the PCs that I played the most in this game, one of them was a Black Fury, the other one was a Silent Strider. I'm not sure that they're going to feel much the same, because Silent Striders used to be based very heavily on Egypt, the Egyptology, and Egypt folklore and mythology. And since they're untying tribes from locations, that won't necessarily be the place anymore. I am also still totally fine. At any rate, Silverfangs, motivate, lead, rally, inspire. The Silverfangs were the nominal leaders in the Guru Nation back in other things. We'll see what kind of a role they'll have in this one. But I like the fact that they're giving verbs to these. I think that it's a good way of of letting people sort of see what these tribes are about without also making sure that they have to rely on things like nationality or cultural significance. So I'm happy about that. However, I do think that they're taking a little bit away from Glasswalkers and Bone Gnars being the only tribes that are comfortable remaining in cities. I think that all of them now will have at least some sort of presence in cities. Again, I don't know for sure, but that's what we've got. So Requiem Lost says, when looking at the verbs, I like that there's a specific theme to each, but enough flexibility within to interpret in interesting ways. And I concur. One of the ways in which that is shown is actually in here, when they show who are the Glasswalkers, and then they have things such as car liberator, detective, tattoo artist, urban planner. Like, there's different ways to play in a tribe. And I do think that that's important for people to recognize. Splats should not be the ultimate dictator of how you should play a character. They should inform how you play a character. So, yeah, we've reached the point of urbanization where we have to be in cities for most plots. I agree, Kung Fu Fenris, which is why I'm kind of glad about how they're de-emphasizing that, because it always kind of felt sort of weird in LARP play. If you were just like, yeah, so why are the Glasswalkers here? Why aren't you just hanging out in the city? Or, what the hell are you doing walking into the city? Just let the Glasswalkers take care of it, which was not also kind of against the spirit of the game anyway, but I like how they're not dealing with it. So the patron spirit for this one is Spider. Spider really likes it if you treat technology well. One thing that we do see is that favor is a relatively minor, so each of the tribes get an advantage. Favor is a relatively minor advantage. So in this case, Glasswalkers get 1 die to technology or science dice pools related to building or repairing things. 1 die isn't a ton. I mean, it's useful. It's glad to have it, rather have it than not, but not overbearing. However, there will be gifts that will be tribe specific. So we don't know what those gifts are yet. However, that's part of the reason why you would pick a specific tribe, is to get access to their gifts. I want a damn burger even when I play a Red Talon. I mean, that's totally fair. So Chandra says, verbs are fine, but I feel that it's caused them to lose some more fine details when they try to make the tribe whatever fit the verbs. It's something we saw with V5 and H5. I think some of that's also going to come down to storyteller fine control. We'll see how it affects the game. But I am in favor of the verbs. It's a tool alongside everything else, and over-reliance on one tool is probably a bad idea. Kung Fu Fenris, I'm totally okay with you knowing things that I don't. Just understand that I'm going to make some mistakes while I talk about this, so which I'm sure you're fine with. So then that was page 70. So now they go back to 44, so then there's Wolf Life. Although many burgeoning werewolves attempt a normal life after the first change, most find the challenge insurmountable. Smoldering rage risks turning an outburst into a massacre, and even if tempers are held in check, an ill-timed shapeshift risks subjecting friends and family to delirium. Work and colleagues present similar hazards, never mind that most werewolves find their old ambitions pale in comparison to the plight of Gaia and the spirit world. While a few guru manage to lead double lives, most retreat to the fringes of society or leave it altogether, taping up residency in camps or compounds with their pack or adopting a vagabond lifestyle. So what this means is not you can't interact with the city, you can't interact with people. It does mean you basically can't live a normal life, and then every once in a while you go out and be a werewolf. This is pretty similar to what you would see in previous editions. I like it. I think that this is just fine. However, the game does later on, I'm not sure if we're going to get to it because obviously there's a lot to cover and we're not going to be able to do it all in this one thing. One thing that we are going to know is that touchstones are in this game, and touchstones are basically the family that you've left behind or things or places that are important to you. So it's not like once you become a werewolf, you no longer care about your family and friends. You still have an interaction with them, though. So, Kung Fu Fenris, the fact that Red Lines came back and that they're pretty good, I'm very happy about that. Release As far as we know, the PDF is going to be released August 2nd because they're trying to release physical copies of the game at Gen Con. I unfortunately can't make it to Gen Con this year. I would have loved to go to Gen Con this year. I hope to go to Gen Con at some point, preferably with a bunch of cool people, because I know some pretty cool people, some of whom have never been to Gen Con. But I think they're releasing the PDF at that point for those who have pre-ordered. We did pre-order, so we'll get the PDF. Which is also why we're not playing Werewolf right away. So something that we are dedicated to, I will point out, is when we get access to the book, we're going to have a look at it. I'm going to go deep. Like I'm basically gonna dive deep into it, because as the storyteller, that's kind of my job. But thankfully, I'm the most familiar with Werewolf. And my players will as well, to the degrees that they want to. And then as a group, we'll determine whether or not we want to play the game. So we have not committed to playing Werewolf. We are very much interested in the game. I think it's likely that we'll play it, but we haven't committed to it. So the reason why I mentioned it that way is just, A, if we choose not to play it, then we haven't, promised something that we can't keep. Much like we did in the past with other things, which I still regret. But the other thing is that it's going to take us at least a little bit of time for us to take and absorb the book, modify our tech to match what the book is in. But we are hopefully going to start the campaign soon after we have access to the book, assuming that that's what we're going to play. So, Kung Fu Fenris, don't fucking tempt me, man. I'll just ask everything. All right. So finding a pack makes sense. Packs in a modern world. So this is an interesting thing that I wanted to look at. So such versatile problem solvers as the Guru take their war against the apocalypse to numerous enemies in many different ways. As you come together with other players to tell a werewolf story, consider the group identity that your pack might have. So there's Urbex, packs that claim territory within cities, and the movements of the cities disenfranchised are likely to uncover secrets of their own in a world that wishes to sweep away such folk entirely. Occult investigators, the open road, so people who travel a lot, radical resistance. Party animals, so the pack may be part of a local counterculture scene or nightlife movement, interested in the leisure spaces where substances have more value than cash, and humans may themselves become commodities or victims for different sorts of monsters. So the key is that there's a lot of different ways that the game can be played out. It doesn't have to be, oh, so we go out and we hit things and they fall down and then we go home. But it could be that if that's what you want to play. The most effective kinds of packs for Chronicles are proactive, troublemakers, if you will, but overall the sorts of Guru who investigate where conflict thrives, rather than waiting for it to come to them. Docile werewolves don't turn back the tide of apocalypse. So this is one of those things that we've seen in a lot of games that are storyteller system adjacent these days, and something that I'm glad that we're seeing a lot of, which is do things. If you're exalted, the only people who are exalted are those who will use their exaltation. If you're gonna play werewolf, be a fucking werewolf. And I like this because there is sometimes temptation for a person to play a character who's like, but I don't want to be a werewolf. That's still an interesting character choice, and I would be okay with somebody doing that. But the point is, if your whole character is designed to avoid the game, that's an issue that can be very tiring for the storyteller and especially the other players. But if you want to play a character who's like, I don't want to be a werewolf, but I have an insatiable need to be a werewolf, that's an interesting character because at least you are still playing the game. Anyway, after the release, I ain't no snitch. I get you. You can be proactive in not wanting to be a werewolf, but you are a werewolf, right? Requiem, I love that you're using the questions. Typically, are packs tied to the same tribe, or is there enough flexibility in the lore to have mixed tribe packs? Absolutely, they can be mixed tribe packs. You could have a pack that has multiple or all of one tribe. Absolutely. But packs tend to not form around tribes. Oftentimes, there just aren't enough. Packs are often werewolves of a similar, I don't want to say age, but a similar level of ability. Because it's part of that is also just because in terms of how games work, you kind of don't want to have a pack where one person can kick all the ass and everyone else just stands behind them and hopes they don't get hit. And oftentimes you're just not going to have all of one tribe being able to represent. The way that I'm going to put it to my players is that they can pick whatever tribe or auspice they want. My guess is that my players are going to want to play, at the very least, different auspices, and almost certainly different auspices, but probably also different tribes. We'll see. In the end, it's not going to be a huge deal if somebody decides that they also want to be the same tribe as someone else. I don't think that that's going to be as much of a thing as, for instance, if you wanted to play the same, I don't know, caste in Exalted. That's kind of where auspices fit in. So let's actually just have a look at those now. Auspice being when you have your first change, what phase of the moon is it? And so therefore it kind of reflects on the role that you have in Guru society. All Guru are responsible for fighting the worm. They'll all get into combat, like, for sure. So, for instance, if you're not Naroon, who are the warriors, it's not that you're not going to fight. And it's not even that you're not going to be an excellent fighter or even the best fighter that you know. It's just that the Aroon's role in society is to deal with war. So they can also be tacticians. They can also, it's kind of like a Dawn caste. In fact, the caste system is very much based a lot on the auspice system. So Ragabash, the new moon, they're about tricking, misdirecting, mocking, and sneaking. Mocking being a very important part. The questioner of ways is how they were described in previous editions. Theurges are the ones who are the most spiritually inclined. Summoning, invoking, placating, and binding. Philodox, the half moon, evaluating, interpreting, punishing, and judging. So they're the ones who are most familiar with the rules, the laws, and being able to act as a mediator. Galliards, the gibbous moons, the storytellers, the moon dancers, regale, hype, unite, bluster. They're the ones who are the faces. They're the ones who will sing your stories, the ones who will be responsible for spreading word. I am a Galliard. I was born a Galliard. If we go by the old ways of the World of Darkness, I was born as a waxing gibbous moon. So, and guess what? I tell stories for a living. So it kind of worked out for me. And the Aroon fighting, attacking, destroying, and charging. I will admit this. These glyphs I have to get used to. I'm used to more simple glyphs. Let me see if I can, are they in here? They might be in here. Let's see if the auspices are marked in here. No, the glyphs aren't here, easily accessible. Secret Werewolf Concern, maybe. Who knows? Avatar of Cain saying it's way more elegant to tie your first change phase to auspice than birth. Feels less deterministic, more like it was meant to be rather than having your future set out of birth. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Yeah, Exalted was initially meant to be linked to the World of Darkness. They dropped it pretty quickly, unless you want to go play Holden Shear's Exalted versus World of Darkness, but I don't really have that much of an interest in that. You were born in the last quarter or third quarter, so you were born when in a crescent moon. That would make you a Theurge, the crosshair. If again we're going by the old World of Darkness, in this case it would be when you had your first change. But auspices don't seem to have changed a ton, just the glyphs, which I'm getting used to. So here's an interesting thing about werewolf names. After their first change, each guru has a decision to make about their identity. They're no longer who they once were. In response, many werewolves at least partially set aside their human names or wolf identities, whether immediately or gradually. In many cases, individual guru keep their first name to be appended with a moniker bestowed on them by their pack, imparted to them in communication with their patron spirit, or discovered as part of the journey in realizing what they are and what it means to them. So this, I believe, Kung Fu Founders, I have no trouble believing that you're a Galliard, especially a waning Galliard. Half Moon. Yep. So then you're a Philodox. So for this is essentially, I think, what they mean about saying things like deed names. I don't know if deed name is an offensive term or whether I don't believe it is, but the idea that Guru have normal names and then deed names, but like that they're not necessarily, they don't have to be deed names, and you can choose what name you want to be known as. Deed names, deed names, D-E-E-D, basically a name that reflects your deeds. I like deed names, so I'm kind of glad that they're sticking around, but you don't have to use them. So there is that. So Heart Wardens, these are the ones who are replacing the Fianna. One thing that I found interesting, I mean, Stag is the patron spirit, makes sense because of the Fianna, that's what they were there. One thing that I'll point out here is Digital Cairn Strategist. Think of it like a game. You got to put things in the right places, mine the resource economy, trap around. When this hit the previews, people were yelling, saying that this is what Glasswalkers are. I like that it's not Glasswalkers. Glasswalkers might be the ones who are most likely to use things like science and technology, but it shouldn't be that if you are touching a computer, then you must be a Glasswalker, or that if you like computers, then you must be a Glasswalker, because I felt that was very reductive. So I'm really pleased to see this. So I'm happy about that. Here, their favor is that they add a die to any dice pool involving survival, animal ken, or nature-related craft. Great. Makes sense. But they also have long-standing traditions of hospitality. So if harm comes to someone while under Heart Warden's hospitality, they may regain only a single willpower at the start of the next session instead of their composure or resolve rating. So this gives us a clue as to how you regain willpower. At the beginning of a session, you regain as much as your composure or resolve. I think I'm okay with this. I tend to run games where sometimes there's long periods of time between sessions, and sometimes one day takes 6 sessions to complete for me. So the fact that it's tied to sessions, I'm okay with that. We'll see how that goes. But I also like the fact that there's a ban that you have to observe, and if you don't observe the ban, then you will regain willpower slowly. So it makes sense. Sounds like how V5 does it, and I'm okay with that. So here are the auspices. Who's the greater fool, the headstrong dipshit, or the knuckleheads who fall unwillingly into folly? So this is essentially the same stuff. The tricksters of Gru Society, the greatest latitude to challenge traditions and question the way things have always been done. Theurges being about spirits, Philodox being about the judges and arbiters, Galliards being the storytellers and lore keepers, and then the Arun were not included in this, but then they released them afterwards. They're the warriors of Guru Society, the fighters of a people who are entirely disposed to ferocious violence. In play, Arun might expect to fight, attack, destroy, and charge into a fray. Fuck you, worm. Makes sense. This page did only have 4 of the 5, so that's the 5th one. Claws go in, blood sprays out. Yep. Then the Ghost Council, one of the renamed tribes, very specifically a tribe that now is just more about the secretive tribe, the one who are very much about seeking and understanding. I like this because before it was tied a little too much to cultural stuff, and I didn't want that to be the case. So their patron spirit is the Horned Serpent. It encourages looking at things from all angles and taking the most advantageous one. A Ghost Council Guru may add 1 die to investigation, occult, or subterfuge dice pools related to revealing a kept secret. Okay, cool. And Horned Spirit is known for wisdom, but spirits and Guru alike look askance at the way she garners knowledge. For a scene in which the Ghost Council werewolf has an opportunity to satisfy their curiosity but doesn't, so if you have the curiosity flaw, they regain only a single point of willpower. Little too much sun on me there, so I'll take that out there. Arun would basically fuck around and find out. I mean, honestly, all Guru are fuck around and find out, but the Arun are the ones who are most likely to just rip your head off. So, gifts and rights. Gifts represent abilities and powers that a werewolf can call upon that are basically granted to them by a spirit. They start with 3 gifts. 1 native gift. So native gifts are gifts that all werewolves can have. 1 auspice gift and 1 tribe gift. These gifts usually rely on a certain type of renown for their dice pools, so be mindful of picking ones that make use of the renown of the character. So depending on your character's deeds, they'll be better at enacting some of these gifts. And they also receive a single rite. Rites are rituals that you can perform. They'll rely more on skills. Fuck around in the RPG clinic half sec way or the someone is going to the hospital way. It's the hospital way. It's the hospital way. So touchstones are here, and Guru have a complex relationship with humankind and an even more complicated relationship with their own nature. So touchstones help them keep their spiritual selves in balance. Systematically, touchstones can travel and take actions and be threatened. Maintaining touchstones is important, as they have the connection between the Guru and the greater world. Without touchstones, a werewolf may quickly become no more than a ravening monster, acting upon their rage without any sense of human or wolf grounding. So you pick 1 to 3 touchstones. The more that you have, the better you're able to mitigate your monstrous impulses, but the more vulnerabilities you have. But that's the point, because touchstones being at risk, they happen often in the Chronicle, as the costs of being a werewolf come to narrative spotlight. So, some examples. Tony's character has a child with a mother who didn't want any part of the increasing anger she saw building in her lover. Tony's character knows the relationship with the mother is beyond repair, but the child needs a world to grow up in, and Tony's character intends to give the child that future. So, a touchstone being their kid. Kendra and her best friend from college took very different paths after graduation, but they remain in close contact with each other. It's complicated because Kendra has grave misgivings about her friend's career as a pharmaceuticals rep in the for-profit healthcare business, but she still loves her friend like a sister, so a best friend. I don't think W5 is going hard on them because the way that they work essentially is if you lose a touchstone, let's see here. Where did it say? Touchstones in play. Yeah. So the player may take advantage of each of the benefits below once per story. So you can lower your rage to 1 by spending a scene or period of downtime with a touchstone. You can restore or heal a point of aggravated willpower damage by spending a scene or period of downtime with a touchstone. This benefit is in addition to the standard willpower recovery as detailed later on, which we don't have. A Guru may spend a scene or period of downtime with a touchstone and move 1 mark on either the Harano or Hogloss tracker to the other. But there are risks to having a touchstone. When one is threatened or injured as a result of the Guru's actions or inaction, the Guru faces a risk of Harano. So that's the give up quality of werewolves. And when a touchstone is lost as a result of the Guru's actions or inaction, the Guru automatically gains a point of Harano or Hoglosk, as agreed by the storyteller and the player. Yes, absolutely. I imagine that you want touchstones to be able to help with balancing your Hoglosk or Harano. But I think that I don't think that this is undue. I think that this is the kind of thing that also your Chronicle can really figure out how much they want to involve touchstones or not. But they do have mechanical benefits and disadvantages. So that's an advantage that we have here. So in a lore sense, is a touchstone your connection to the mortal world? Kinda. It's one of the things that keeps you grounded. So there are things such as here, it has Wolfborn and Wolf touchstones. So some players may enjoy the ability to represent their characters as being Wolfborn with a touchstone connection to reflect it. Note that wolves typically don't live as long as humans, and they don't have the same volition conforming their ability to move or take actions as do humans. Whatever the case, we don't recommend having more than a single wolf touchstone, if any. Touchstones are intended mostly to ground Guru characters in their extended human community. So I would say that if you are a wolf-born Guru, that's okay. You can also have human touchstones because you can interact with the human world, but having a wolf touchstone is still there. So yeah, it's the stuff that it's the stuff that you can keep down as a connection to the real world. The things that are like, if I'm not currently fighting this war, what do I care about? Which I think is one of those things that is important because it kind of helps give tools against murder hobos, especially in a game where being a murder hobo is perhaps a bit more acceptable than others. This is kind of a way of saying, like, look, you have vulnerabilities that isn't just you and your body. And as Kung Fu Fenrir said, touchstones can actually be a scene with a phone call. So that is 100% true as well, right? It's a way for you to deal. So it's just going to depend on what you and your storyteller come up with. So the finishing touches, again, things like, do they care a great deal for their tribe and how it affects their sense of self? Do they know other werewolves? How do they feel about living through an ongoing apocalypse? Do they believe it's the apocalypse at all, or is that doomer nihilism? Doomer. Doomer. I like that. So then we have the different forms. So werewolves can take 5 forms. They can take Homid, which is the human form, Glabro, which is kind of like a hairier, more bestial human, but still somebody who you could pass for as human somewhat. Kind of like a Mr. Hyde. There's Krynos, or Krynos. I still got to figure out how to pronounce that, and I think honestly it doesn't matter that much, but whatever. People have their own opinions. A Krynos werewolf is like the war form. You have Hispo, which is a dire wolf, and then Lupus, which is just a straight up wolf. So we know what the advantages are. So for Homid, the advantages are that you can't regenerate. So werewolves are very good at regenerating damage, but they can touch silver without suffering damage. And they're the ones who are most likely to be able to communicate well with humanity. Glabro, it costs a rage check to shift into Glabro. So we'll see what a rage check is in a little bit. While the form isn't obviously unnatural, they do suffer a 2 dice penalty to non-intimidation social tests, but they get a 2 dice bonus to physical tests, and they can regenerate health. So, a handy thing. Krynos. Now, here's the real thing. First of all, 2 rage checks to get into Krynos, but ordinary communication is nigh impossible. A guru in Krynos has difficulty forming expressions beyond single words like kill, enemy, worm, usually with a guttural snarling delivery. This condition makes non-intimidation, social, and stealth tests automatically fail, but you also get a 4 die bonus to all physical tests. In this game, 1 die is actually a big deal because they tend to be 1 roll resolutions. I might be using the wrong term there because 1 roll resolution can also just mean roll it once to figure out a whole scene. But when you roll the dice, when you attack somebody, the number of successes is the amount of damage you do. There isn't roll for attack, then roll for damage, roll for defense, roll for soak. Like it's not that. So 4 dice is huge. Combat tends to be 3 rolls and out. Yeah. 4 bonus health levels. It's pretty strong, but they will shift over to your normal form if you haven't regenerated them. You get +3 damage claws. It's a lot. +1 aggravated bite. That's a lot. So +3 damage claws, superficial versus werewolves, vampires, and other supernatural creatures with similar resistance. Okay. But the aggravated damage bite is ag for everyone. They can regenerate 2 health levels with a rage check. And if you're a human and you witness them, they almost certainly experience delirium. But at the start of a turn, like I said, if they didn't kill something in the previous turn, they must go into frenzy if they don't spend willpower. So that is huge, because frenzy is not a place where you want to be. Hispo get 2 dice bonus to all non-stealth physical tests. They also get a +1 aggravated damage bite, and they can regenerate health. But if you're Lupus, if you're just a normal wolf, you can't regenerate, but you're not affected by silver. You can communicate with wolves and other guru, but you can also get various 2 dice bonuses like to survival or stealth, depending on whether being a wolf would be beneficial. I kind of like that they keep that vague because I think that it can be useful to be a wolf, but it also was a little weird when it was just like, yeah, turn into a wolf and you get this dice bonus. So people would shift into Lupus, even though like it would honestly be kind of weird to do so. So +2 to Bork. Yeah, sure, they'll get +2 to Bork. So Frenzy. Frenzy is kind of important because you enter Frenzy if at the start of your turn, while in Krynos, you didn't kill anything. This can be voluntary as a response to overwhelming odds, because it can be useful for you to Frenzy in certain circumstances, or involuntary if your willpower is completely depleted. The storyteller can also call for a frenzy test in cases of extreme provocation, such as any harming of touchstones, in which case a willpower test must be made against a difficulty of 2 or 3 in Krynos form. And if you're in Frenzy, here's the deal. First, your rage automatically goes up to 5. You shift to Krynos instantly, and you mercilessly attack anything perceived as a threat, starting with whoever or whatever provoked the frenzy if applicable. You have no choice, you must. If anyone's attacking them, the werewolf must try to close the distance and engage the target with their natural weapons. So you can't, bring a gun. Doesn't work. If no one is attacking, they try to pursue those who flee, and thereafter, they assail any bystanders. The guru does not perform any defensive acts, such as taking cover or attempting dodge tests against ranged weapons, but does attempt to regenerate health, making rage checks as normal to do so. While in Frenzy, the guru becomes immune to health-based penalties, short of dismemberment, and they receive a 3 dice bonus to resisting mental gifts or gift-like effects, such as vampiric powers, unless the powers specifically affect a target in Frenzy. So you see that they are building in the ability to put vampires in with werewolves here. The werewolf cannot themselves use gifts, however. This is interesting. And they must keep acting out Frenzy, or the player must yield control of the character to the storyteller. The player may not use willpower in any way, such as re-rolling dice. Frenzy is a bit of a chaos roll. Once every perceived threat is dead or silenced, the player can make a willpower test at difficulty 2 to leave Frenzy. And if they choose not to, or the test fails, the Frenzy resumes until no one but the Frenzying Guru is left standing. Their rage drops to 0, or the scene ends. Certain gifts and other abilities can also end the Frenzy. No matter how the Frenzy ends, the Guru reverts to their natural form and has the rage set to 0, losing the wolf. So, some things that are not clear is whether they'll attack. It says that they'll attack bystanders. I think this also means that you could potentially attack members of your own pack. There's a few things that I'm not entirely sure about this. See you later, Kung Fu Fan. It's good to see you coming in here. But I believe that look, Frenzy's a bad way to be. It can be necessary to keep you going if you have to fight and you need to be able to maintain your Krynos form. But it's not a great place to be in. So you generally want to avoid Frenzy if you can. But it'll almost certainly happen at some point. It's just the way things go. Requiem asks, do werewolves tend to have a specific lupus form or wolf species they form into, gray wolf, red wolf, or so on, or is it up to the player where they're from? I don't know in 5th edition. In previous editions, it depended on your tribe. But your tribe was based a lot on cultural and geolocation, and now it's very specifically not. I imagine you can kind of pick what kind of wolf form you would turn into. It is a wolf. It's not like, oh, could I be a dog instead? You are a wolf. But your markings specifically, I imagine you're going to be able to choose that yourself. Crosshair asks, now here I have possibly an interesting question. We know how we feel about taking control of a player by the storyteller, so player agency, but is this saying you can give control to the storyteller? Is this an actual good lose control of character thing? I think that this is here for the wording I imagine that you're talking about is the player must yield control of the character to the storyteller. I think that that's there for 2 reasons. One, there will be players who will frenzy and then find excuses to not do bad things. They will be like, well, I won't attack bystanders because I won't. I'll attack this pole because the pole's pissing me off. So I think that that's there so that storytellers can be like, I will take control of the character for you if you need to. And I think players can also yield control if they are interested in basically not knowing what has happened. Because you could potentially have somebody frenzy and then have the storyteller just say, all right, well, I'll tell you when you wake up. So it's Requiem. I mean, okay. So there's a way to interpret this. But in much the same way that a limit break, you got to play the limit break. And if you don't, then the storyteller could potentially just tell you what happens. These games have also these kinds of shoot, I forget the actual name for these. Oh man, that's gonna bother me. Someone in here is gonna know what it is. Someone's gonna remember. But lore sheets, yeah. So these are things that like you can be a part of. You can take a lore sheet and it's sort of like an extra add-on to your character that you can buy up. Oh yeah, no, sorry. If that's the question, as Flora Vargas said, you don't get to pick each time what kind of wolf you become. You are this particular wolf. I just think that you, as the player, get to choose at character creation what kind of wolf you would turn into, like what your markings are, what your fur color is. But no, you can't just decide, I think, at random, like, today I want to be a purple wolf, and tomorrow I think I'll turn into a baby wolf. Like, no, you can't do that. So this one, for instance, means that you have some pull or association with Project Twilight, which is a human-led initiative that's about, dealing with werewolves. There's Umbral Traveler, so it's a way to reflect the fact that you spend a lot of time in the Umbra. So these are ways that you can kind of customize your character a little bit. I'm down for this. So we see this little hint here that grappling is a rule that you can do. This grappling is a lot less of an issue than other grappling. It's a lot less complicated because they basically say you roll strength brawl. If you get more successes, you do no damage, but you restrain the target, preventing them from moving and from engaging other opponents, though the target can still act against the grappler as normal. And then in the next round, you can either damage the foe or do nothing apart from hold the foe in place. So grappling is not nearly as complicated, but it is a little bit of a combat maneuver in here. So like there will be some extra combat stuff that we'll see here. The crosshair. So I will say this, the game would not be compatible with that. You feel free to come up with your own headcanon, but that would be against the theme of the game. So the golden rule, change things. So maybe you can be a foot tall, small ball of furry rage. So the most important rule of all, the only real rule worth following, the story belongs to you and your troop. This game should be whatever you want it to be, whether that's a nearly diceless chronicle of in-character intrigue against the crumbling remains of the Gru Nation, or a long-running tactical chronicle with each player controlling their own pack of werewolves. Fine. Do what you want. The only thing that I would say is that this might be the golden rule, but there is a more important rule, which is just stay safe. Maintain safety. Let's answer this question. Do you see touchstones as not a replacement for intimacies, but as a parallel? Or if the player wishes, would you encourage players to take intimacies? Sorry, not entirely sure to phrase the question. Yeah, they're kind of like intimacies. Intimacies are a specific part of social combat in Exalted, where you would determine your dedication to either a person or an object or a place, but also potentially an ideal. And depending on your intimacies, they can either protect you from acting against them, but they can also be used to exploit you. Touchstones are a similar thing. I would say that touchstones are kind of like an intimacy, but you cannot choose as a touchstone something that's part of the supernatural world. It's specifically an attempt to keep you grounded. So rage. The following rules specifically reflect the Guru experience. Systems such as those for shifting form, delirium, rage, blah, 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 blah. So, perhaps the single most defining characteristic of werewolves, rage forever roils in the hearts and souls of Guru, becomes manifest in their bodies and allows them to perform terrifying acts of brutality. Throughout stories, players must decide how to best channel their character's rage, whether to feed its fires or to invoke it but risk not being able to call upon the fury of the Guru at some critical point. So rage is a tracker spanning from 0 to 5. Any Guru can achieve Rage 5, no fixed rate, restrict its accumulation, and it is frequently in flux. They mention this because it used to be in old versions of Werewolf that Rage had a permanent stat and a temporary stat, and depending on specifically your auspice would determine your starting Rage. Now that's no longer the case. I like this. It also is part of the reason why people would choose certain auspices, because they wanted to control how much Rage they had. Starting value for Rage is determined by the narrative situation. So a Guru who isn't involved in an ongoing conflict and has had a good night's sleep starts at 1, whereas opening in media res with a fight or flight situation would yield player characters 3. And if questions arise, assume a starting Rage value of 2. So, makes sense. You gain Rage by howling at the moon for the first time on a given night. If you're at 0 Rage and you've lost the wolf, this is the only way to regain Rage outside of very special means. If you are provoked, so if you suffer harm, pain, or other emotional or physical agitation, you gain a point of Rage, maximum 1 point per turn. But once combat begins, once it's specific combat, most damage and injury don't yield additional Rage. Low-level provocations such as insults and trash talk don't provoke further Rage either. So a careless insult tossed somebody's way is not necessarily going to gain Rage, but a player might say, I would take that poorly and then gain Rage instead. Truly biting insults could continue to generate Rage over the course of things. Same with combat. When you're in combat, the first time you get hurt, you'll probably gain Rage. After that, probably not, unless something that would be significant might do that. Like, for instance, you might gain Rage if you see one of your packmates fall. Rites are rite-like practices, so spending a scene getting psyched up, performing a tribe or auspice-related activity, ranging from a solemn retelling of past grievances to picking fights at a soccer match, can yield 1 or 2 points at the storyteller's discretion, and some gifts can modify Rage. If an effect would take a Guru's Rage past 5, they instead sustain a point of superficial willpower damage. So willpower is now like a health track. You can spend willpower in order to help yourself. It lets you re-roll dice. It's not automatic successes anymore. But it's essentially a resource that you have to spend, but it's also your health, your mental health. So if you fill up your willpower with superficial or aggravated damage, it could be bad. So the storyteller and the player are responsible for Rage gains. A player is encouraged to suggest a gain when they feel it's appropriate, just as the storyteller shouldn't be afraid to apply it liberally and thematically. The rate at which characters gain Rage is also a powerful storyteller tool, which I will use as I see. It's also but a storyteller should be mindful of players who are attempting to game the system by using gifts or other abilities for the sake of dumping Rage. And so the game's basically telling you that if somebody's trying to abuse the system, you can abuse them back, because spirits tend to frown upon such abuse, and recklessly calling upon them to perform gifts is sure to have consequences. Yeah. So you can spend or lose Rage. You can regenerate by expending Rage and making a Rage check, which we'll see below. Shapeshifting. To change or maintain forms can require a Rage check, depending on the form. Some gifts require Rage checks, and some gifts can soothe a Guru and allow them to shed Rage voluntarily, whereas other gifts can rob them of Rage. Now, a Rage check is that when you want to release your Rageborn powers, you make a Rage check with a single die. On a win, which is a 6 or better, the Guru's Rage stays the same, but a failed check, 5 or less, causes their Rage to drop by 1 point. Make the Rage check at the same time as the act provoking it, ideally with its own identifiable die. So that's why I mentioned that you might want to have 3 colors of dice. You have 1 special die for a Rage die. Rage decreasing in this manner doesn't necessarily represent the Guru becoming less angry, but rather models how the Rage is expressed, the pent-up energy manifesting as gifts or a more vicious supernatural form. But if you lose all your Rage, you can no longer perform acts that require a Rage check, remain in a supernatural form, or use rites or gifts. Rage can never go below 0, and any loss that would suggest it, such as one incurred from a failed double Rage check at Rage 1, is ignored. The only way a Guru can regain the wolf other than by mystical means is to howl at the moon. But for every point of rage possessed by a character, one rage die replaces one of the regular dice when assembling dice pools. So it's kind of like a nightmare pool, except it happens all the time. Rage dice function like regular dice, but the 1 and 2 faces are considered special. Each is a brutal die result. On its own, a single brutal result is simply treated as a failure. But if 2 or more on a single test yields a brutal outcome, but 2 or more on a single test yields a brutal outcome. So it's kind of like a botch. A brutal outcome causes a test to fail, usually with something being wrecked, harmed, or destroyed, unless the aim of the test was to cause damage or injury, in which case a brutal outcome yields 4 additional successes. So if you're working on a computer and you get a brutal outcome, you will probably destroy the computer, smash it. Like, it doesn't do what it wants, your rage expresses itself, the computer is smashed. But if you're already trying to destroy something, you just destroy it better. So rage can be really handy in combat, but also remember that if you get a whole lot of extra dice, you might do more damage than you intended. Although firing a sniper rifle to take out an enemy has the goal of causing damage, the activity requires a far too composed a mindset to benefit from unbridled rage. So yeah, you can't use this to do something precise like fire a sniper rifle. So the dice system is similar to that in Werewolf. If you roll a 6 to a 9, it's a success. You roll a 10, it's also a success. If you roll 2 10s, you get those successes, but you get an additional 2 successes. So each of those 10 count for 2. We just talked about brutal results. And then 1 to 5s just don't do anything on blank dice, and 1 to 2 have the brutal results. So relatively simple. Difficulties, instead of it changing the target number, so for instance, it's not like you're rolling dice to try to get a 7 or higher or an 8 or higher. It's always 6 or higher, but you have to get a certain number of successes in order to succeed. So if I say that it's a difficulty 3, it means you must roll 3 successes. If you roll fewer than that, it might mean either a partial success or it'll be a failure, but like a degree of failure, or it could mean a success with consequences. If this is similar to what Vampire is doing, but I don't think we have that here because this is the very end of the document. Requiem says, so correct me if I'm wrong, but rage is a blessing and a curse. You need rage to well be a werewolf, but it can cause unintended and brutal effects. 100% absolutely. Rage is a benefit for you in that it can power a lot of your cool stuff, but the more rage you have, the more likely you are to do damage when you don't want to. And things can manipulate you as a result. So it's a rough situation to find yourself in, but part of the game is balancing your rage. So this is better reflected in 5th edition than it is reflected in the previous ones. In the previous ones, your temporary rage, the amount of rage that you had, kind of went up or down depending on what was going on, but like it didn't really matter. What mattered was your permanent rage. And so therefore the only balance was, if I want to have access to a lot of rage, I also risk frenzying, because if you ever rolled 4 or more dice on a rage check, you frenzied. Now they don't have that. Now there's a balance that you have to strike all the time between how much rage you are currently carrying. So I like this a bit. Yeah, a lot of Werewolf is risk reward management. The crosshair is correct. It's a balance game, right? Avatar, we see balance. You're torn between 2 different principles. Werewolf, there's a lot of like, I know what I need to do, but I know that there will be consequences. What should I do at this point? How do I get around those consequences, or do I just suffer them? Or do others suffer them for me? But overall, I mean, this is just a small part, right? We've seen about, I think it's approximately like 30 pages thereabouts that we've looked through, and there's hundreds of pages in the core book, so there's plenty more that we're going to have to look into later on. But it does excite me. I do plan, if we are going to run Werewolf, I will record like a primer for people who aren't familiar with Werewolf so that they can understand what the game is. But I am looking forward to this, and I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of the changes that will come through. Now, that being said, thanks so much for tuning in. Sorry that there was no Punchy today, but we got to do this instead. Tomorrow we'll see what's happening. There will not likely be a Drew crew or a Doomed. I know that there was hope that there would be, but I don't believe it's going to happen at this point. If there is a Drew crew, keep an eye on the Discord for the time. But I think that it is likely that it may not happen. We'll see. But yeah, it's on the Discord, so join that. That's the best way to find out. Otherwise, on Sunday, we're continuing our Avatar Legends campaign, the Mirror Scale. That will be starting for the last time at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The following week, we are going to a much earlier time. We'll be starting at 2 p.m. Eastern from that point on. But this Sunday, same time as it's been, 5 p.m. Eastern. That Chronicle, we're still having a ton of fun with it. So hopefully you'll come in and join us. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in. Super appreciated. And we'll see you next time.